Hello, and welcome to the third part of this week's KRAD COVID reading special thing where we're reading Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and the last of the three stories I'm doing this week is one that I wrote specifically for the RAGNAROK and ROLL collection in 2013. One of the recurring themes of the Cassie stories is the relationship between Loki and his wife Sigyn. Loki being, of course, the trickster god who tried to destroy the world in the title story of RAGNAROK and ROLL, and has been sort of a pain in the ass ever since in various and sundry stories, including Run for Your Life, which I read earlier this week. In this particular case, we get to learn the entire history of Loki and Sigyn's relationship in a story called Love Over and Over, which is named after a song by the McGarrigle sisters, which is great. Anyway. Without further ado, here is Love Over and Over. I really should never check my email before I've had coffee. Since settling in Key West, I've fallen into a pretty consistent pattern of going to bed at 5 a.m. and getting up at 11. During those 6 hours of slumber, the email tends to pile up a bit. Digests from scuba diving related mailing lists I'm on. Email from various family and friends. The newsletter from that awful guitarist who's been hitting on me since I got here. The daily email from Mom sent before she goes to work in San Diego, and a metric fuck-ton of spam. No, I don't have a spam filter. I used to, but I didn't check it often enough, and that almost got a friend of mine killed by a Nixie. Plus, I usually have email from either Carrie Zimmerman or Andy Wasserstein, my bosses at the Sea Clips Dive Shop, telling me who signed up for the afternoon dive. On those mornings when I remembered to charge my smartphone overnight, I check my email when I get up. This particular Friday morning I had charged it, so the email from Kara informed me that my afternoon dive included Rainey, one of my regulars, a trio of college students who'd been diving with me all week, and V.E. Bulwark. I nearly dropped the phone. After my shower, I squeezed myself into my neoprene dive suit and stumbled down the wooden stairs that led down from my second-floor hotel room in the Bottroff House bed and breakfast. I knew better than to try to talk to anyone before coffee, so it wasn't until after I guzzled down some of the B&B's excellent Hawaiian Kona that I dialed Sea Clips. "Hey, Cass," said Andy on the other end. "Please tell me your wife is playing a joke on me." "What do you mean? Bulwark?" "No joke, he's back. In fact, he's here now. It gave me a chance to catch up since I haven't seen him since April. I figured the snow scared him off." I briefly considered telling Andy the truth, that V.E. Bulwark was really Odin, the Allfather of the Aesir, and that the snowstorm in April was actually Fimbulvetter, the beginning of the end of the world, being brought about by Odin's blood brother, Loki, until Odin and I stopped him. And oh, by the way, Odin also told me that I'm a Dis, a Norse fate goddess. But he'd probably fire me for being a crazy person. Or not. I totally saved his business after that UFO crash on Dried Tortugas. Andy was still talking. "I offered to take him out sooner, but he insisted on going on your dive. And hey, customer's always right, right?" "Right." I shook my head and poured another mug of coffee before heading back up to my cottage. "See you soon, then." "You seem distressed," said the captain as I came in. As usual, the ghost of Captain Jeremiah Bottroff had avoided being there when I woke up. 19th century wrecker captains got all squirrely when they had to look at naked female flesh, and this particular one tried to avoid dealing with the owner of that flesh being as cranky as I am first thing. But he was waiting for me upon my return from the coffee run. "That's one word for it. Odin's back." "Really? That is unexpected." I grabbed my dive bag from the closet. "Unexpected? That's the best you can do? Last time he showed up, the world nearly ended." "True, but the gentleman was also the only person with whom I have had any intellectual congress besides yourself since my demise." I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd been the captain's first conversation in 150 years when I showed up at the Bottroff House last year. Odin was his second. With a sigh, I went back outside and tossed the bag into the back of Rocinante, my 1985 Ford F-150 pickup truck. The drive to Stock Island seemed to take forever. I mean, yeah, there was traffic on Route 1. There's always traffic on Route 1. But the anticipation of wondering why the fuck Odin was back after 6 months just dragged it out. When I got there, the three students were standing at the counter, debating the merits of buying a dive knife with Andy. Rainey had actually deigned to show up. He generally missed like a third of his dives, and was looking at the regulators. And off in one of the corners of the shop, behind the magazine rack, was a big guy with a bald crown, shock of white hair around the temple tied back into a ponytail, and a missing left eye. No eye patch or anything, just a blank socket. But Odin made it work. I honestly wasn't sure how I was going to react to seeing him again, considering how much he turned my life inside out. Okay, that's not fair. My life was already inside out. He was just the one who explained to me why. But when he turned to say, "Hello, Cassie," in that deep, authoritative voice of his, I actually smiled and realized I was glad to see him. "What?" I said with a cheeky grin. "You can't come visit? You have to set up an appointment at my job and surprise me?" Solemnly, Odin said, "I'm afraid that it was the only way I would be able to speak to you directly. Actually, they have these fabulous new inventions called telephones." Odin's mouth twitched a bit, and for a second I thought he might actually smile. So I've been led to understand. However, I felt it was best for this conversation to take place in person, and it needed to be here rather than your home or the tavern. Why's that? Because the other two locales are on Key West, and I am unable to set foot on that island. How'd that happen? Shaking his head, Odin rubbed his bearded chin. "A spell so prevents me. Cassie. I have grown old and careless to allow this to happen." What to happen? Who cast the spell? "Loki did, after he escaped." I blinked. "Loki escaped?" "Yes." Throwing my hands in the air, I asked, "Why the fuck didn't you lead with that?" "God fucking damn it, we've got to..." Odin put what he probably thought was a comforting hand on my shoulder. Last time he did that, he used his own mojo to boost mine so I could cast a counterspell that would keep Loki from destroying the world. This time I felt a jolt of... something. Encouragement, maybe? In any case, I was suddenly less pissed off. Loki has a fraction of the power he had when last you met. Indeed, he only has as much as he does due to the continued fascination with the comic book versions of the Aesir that have propagated for the past several decades. I snorted. Prior to actually meeting the remnants of the Norse pantheon, what little knowledge I had of the Aesir were from my twin brother Paul's comic book collection. And man, did they get it wrong. From Stan Lee and Jack Kirby all the way through to Kenneth Branagh and Joss Whedon and beyond. That power is what enables him to keep me from Key West, but he can do little else at present. So the threat is not imminent, nor is it likely that he will again try to bring about Ragnarok. Yeah, but there is a threat, right? Perhaps, Odin said slowly. I frowned. What does perhaps mean in this context exactly? There are always many possibilities where my blood brother is concerned. Okay, for the record, when I ask you to clarify one of the cryptic-ass things you always say, don't respond with something even more cryptic! Before Odin could respond, though, Rainey walked over, asked if we were going to be heading out to dive soon. Looking over at the counter, the students had decided not to buy knives, and were standing around waiting impatiently. Being teenagers, this meant that they were fondling their smartphones. I gotta admit, I have no memory of the dive itself. You have to dive with a buddy, so I went with one of the students, the other two making up another pair, while Rainey dived with Odin. I'd forgotten to change the batteries for my underwater camera, so I couldn't even get any pictures. Two hours later, I pulled the boat back into the dock and turned to Odin. Want to get a bite? Very well. Where? I'm starving. Let's just go to the waterfront. That was the bar/restaurant that shared a parking lot with Sea Clips. Diving was hard work, and afterwards one tended to be so hungry as to be willing to eat whatever crap was thrown in front of you. The waterfront catered to this by offering quite the variety of crap to so throw. We walked across the parking lot and took a booth. I ordered a pint of beer and gulped down half of it once it arrived. Odin raised a bushy white eyebrow. Is it wise to imbibe so much following an underwater sojourn? Says the Norse god famous for feasting and getting drunk who's holding a bourbon in his hand. Besides, the only thing this place has going for it is its halfway decent beer selection, and if you drink enough of it, you don't notice how dire the food is. I let out the belch that had been building since I guzzled the beer. Excuse me. So, if Loki isn't trying to destroy the world again, what do you think he's got up his sleeve? I suspect, given that he's used all his magical resources to keep me away from him, that his concerns are a bit more mundane. Most likely he wishes to win Sigyn back. I snarfed my beer. Seriously? He'd be better off trying to take Ragnarok out for another stroll. Ginny made it pretty clear that she doesn't want anything to do with him. Odin hesitated before replying to that. This would not be the first occasion wherein Sigyn swore off Loki only to take him back. nor even the second or the third. I frowned. Say what? Loki and Sigyn have had quite a tempestuous relationship. Sigyn smiled as the earth nymphs brought her a plate filled with vegetables, as well as a mug filled with water taken from the nearby river. The nymphs always moved quickly to fulfill her desires. Thank you for these gifts, she said to her subjects. The nymphs tittered and giggled as they did. You are a goddess, my lady, one said. Another added, we live to do your bidding. Perhaps, but I still am grateful, and see no reason not to express it. Hearing chuckling from behind her, Sigyn whirled around to see a man standing behind a nearby tree. The nymphs scattered, for they refused to be seen by any of the Aesir or the Jotun, and the man behind the tree was both. The man stepped forward. Only a fool would thank such creatures as they, and there's an even bigger fool who thanks them for that. Sigyn smiled. Does the trickster only eat the meats of animals he has slain? You know who I am? Of course. You are Loki, Laufey's son, and the Allfather's blood brother. I am surprised that you are not partaking of Aedir's feast. Loki sat down on the ground next to Sigyn and grabbed a carrot from her plate. I was partaking of it. Aedir had me remove the pompous windbag. I never liked him, you know. He criticized my table manners. Can you believe that? Yes. Sigyn stared at the carrot in his hand. Throwing his head back and laughing, Loki said, I like you, commander of the earth nymphs. Why have I not seen you before? No doubt because Loki pays attention to no one who does not benefit his own desires and ambitions. Another laugh. No doubt. I am Sigyn. Loki took her hand and kissed it. A pleasure, my dear. Mine or yours? Grinning, Loki replied, can it not be both? They both laughed at that. Sigyn took a bite of a radish and then asked, why did you leave the feast? I told you, Aedir had me removed. So Aedir's wishes are to be fulfilled, but mine are not. Excuse me? Loki stood up now, staring angrily down at her. I desired privacy, and to have my meal alone here in the woods. Yet you ignored my desires and took my carrot and invaded my privacy. Aedir desired that you depart his hall, and you acceded to his wishes. So you treat Aedir, whom you just told me you never liked, with respect. Yet you treat me, whom you claim it is a pleasure to meet, with none. Why is that? For several moments, Loki stared at her some more. But soon his face softened, and for the second time he leaned his head back and chortled to the sky. You pose a most excellent argument, Sigyn. I shall return to Aedir's hall and demand a seat at the table. He bowed low. I thank you, my dear, and hope to see you again. I finished my burger at the same time that Odin finished the story. That's how they met? Odin nodded. I shook my head, finally placing the story in my head. Wait, wasn't that story from the Lokasenna? I don't remember Sigyn being in that. After averting Ragnarok in April, I'd done an in-depth study of Norse myth. By Memorial Day, I'd read more Snorri Sturluson than I had Lord Byron, and I did my master's thesis on Byron. Hell, I didn't even realize she was the goddess of the earth nymphs. Makes you wonder what she's doing living on an island. You mortals told many tales of the Aesir, Odin said dryly, and many details were lost in the retellings. Didn't Aedir kick Loki out because he killed one of Aedir's servants? It does not matter, Odin said. The point, I wasn't letting that go, however. It probably mattered a lot to the servant. Regardless, that was how they met. Odin was sounding a bit exasperated. They eventually married and had 2 children, Nari and Vali. When Loki tricked Hodor into killing Balder, yeah, I waved my hand in a get-on-with-it gesture. He failed to bring about Ragnarok, and you trapped him in a cave with Sigyn. Odin stared into his glass of bourbon. In fact, I did nothing. It was Skjaldi who imprisoned him, though everyone assumed it was with my consent. Wasn't it? I asked. Pointedly, Odin didn't answer that one, the fucker. Also, it was only to be Loki's prison, but as Skjaldi chose to trap him beneath the ground, Sigyn was able to instruct her nymphs to find him, and so she joined him, sparing him from the snake's poison. I ordered another beer, then asked Odin a question I never was able to bring myself to ask Sigyn. Not even when we took a massive road trip from Key West to Hazelhurst, Mississippi and back. How did they get out of that anyhow? The cave was located under a city that has gone by many names over the centuries. The descendants of our worshippers called it Viburi. Currently it is known as Viborg, and during a conflict some 7 decades past, known as the Winter War, the city was devastated by fire from the sky. I nodded. Yeah, I bet you didn't anticipate airstrikes when you stuck Loki down there. Indeed. One of those strikes exposed the cave, and allowed Loki to escape. Odin finished his bourbon. The incident at the tavern in April was far from the first time Loki attempted to gather worshippers to provide him with the power to bring about Ragnarok. And remember, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You must reach down into your heart and tell yourself that you are the master of your own fate. You don't need to be scared of what might come, because you're the man in charge. Be a man, and you can be the man. Smiling, he added, I am Stu R. Lerson, and I thank you all for being here. There was a smattering of applause, and the men in the room all got up from their chairs. Many headed for the exits, but a few went up to talk to the man in front. His short blonde hair carefully brill-creamed into place, his clean-shaven face displaying a bright smile, his dark suit exuding confidence and authority, he stayed to shake hands with the men who came up to him after the talk. I gotta say, Mr. Lerson, I think these talks are really swell. Thank you, but I can assure you that I'm just here to bring out what you've already got inside you. After the stragglers left, only one remained in the room with Mr. Lerson, and that was an older man with a monk's fringe of white hair and an eye patch over his left eye. Well, you found me, Allfather. Odin stepped forward, tugging on the tie he wore. Your choice of alias proved impossible to resist, Blood Brother, he said with a wry smile. You believe that this cult you formed will grant you what you desire? Sigyn left me, Allfather. After Viborg, she tracked me down to Toronto, wanting to know why I abandoned her. He snorted, silly cow, as if I would wish to spend any more time with her after 8 centuries of torture. But she soon reminded me of why I loved her, and after the mortal's tiresome war ended, we lived together in London for a time, until she refused to help me steal the Gosforth Cross. Can you believe that? Yes, Odin said with a small smile. The cross is guarded, in a public place, Loki. Loki rolled his eyes. Sigyn's precious little earth nymphs could have easily pulled it underground and brought it to her. All she need do is ask, and they fall all over themselves to do her bidding. She refused, she accused me of using her, and she left me. He sighed. So I came here to St. Louis. Odin shook his head. You believe the devotion of a few annoyed young men will provide you with the power to bring about Ragnarok? It's worth a try. He grinned. Especially since I've been denied the Gospel of Cross. I swore an oath not to harm you, Blood Brother, and so I shall not. Good, Loki said emphatically, but you will not succeed. Your message is not one that will inspire the devotion you require. I rolled my eyes as I gulped down my third beer. A cult? Really? It is no stranger than forming a musical troupe. Fair point. Obviously it didn't work, seeing as how the world's still here and all. Indeed. He was unable to garner sufficient devotion from this cult, nor any of the others that he attempted over the years. Indeed, his endeavor on Key West would also have failed, but for the discovery that the tavern was built around a root of Yggdrasil. His other endeavors required far more magic than was needed to simply sunder a tree he was standing in front of. I signaled the server for the check. All right, I'll warn Ginny when I see her tonight, at Mayor Fred's tonight. You would be wise to seek her out sooner, Cassie, Odin said gravely. My blood brother earned his reputation as a trickster. He rarely gets what he wants, but he has an unfortunate tendency to leave a considerable amount of carnage in the wake of his attempts. Yeah, I sighed. Just before the check came, Odin leaned forward. I have observed your progress, Cassie. You have used your gifts as one of the Disir very well. I tried not to think about how creepy it was that he'd somehow been observing my progress without my knowing. Thanks, but it'd be nice to know what those gifts are. I've been kind of playing it by ear, and it's really annoying. It is better this way. You will learn your capabilities in due course. Easy for you to say. Of course. His eye actually twinkled. I am the Allfather. Besides, it would not do for you to twist the fate of a god before you were ready for it. Throwing up my hands, I said, see, this is what I'm talking about! I can twist a god's fate? Odin paid the check, which was a surprise. He paid it entirely with coins, which wasn't. We departed, and I hopped into Rocinante. Odin, for his part, just wandered off the way he always did. Ginny always seemed to walk everywhere, too. Crazy-ass motherfuckers, these Norse gods. Even as I drove toward Route 1, I realized that I had no idea where to find Ginny. I only saw her at Mayor Fred's, where she'd become the drummer for 1812, the group that Loki's attempted a band had temporarily replaced as the weekend house band at that Green Street saloon. I didn't know where she lived, where she worked, if she worked, nothing. Of course, I didn't spend nearly as much time with her as the other members of the band did, so I whipped out my smartphone and called Bobby, the guitarist for 1812 and one of my best friends since I moved down here. This, by the way, was completely legal in the state of Florida, though it remains spectacularly stupid, especially after also having had 3 beers. Luckily, at 5'11", it takes a lot more than 3 beers to impair my driving. Besides, this was a matter of life and death, possibly. If nothing else, I so very much wanted to bring about Loki's death for what he'd done to my life. "Hey, Cass," Bobby said. I could hear the voices of the customers at the store her parents owned, and where she and her 6 brothers all worked part-time. This is going to sound like a stupid question, but I need to talk to Ginny before the gig tonight, and I haven't the first clue where to find her. "Well, she said last night that she was going to be working a phone bank up in Marathon." "Phone bank?" "Yeah, for Greenpeace. It's a storefront on the corner of Route 1 and 29th. Why was I not surprised that the goddess of the earth nymphs was volunteering for Greenpeace? All right, thanks, Bobby. See you tonight? "Yeah, of course. Is everything okay?" Bobby knew I was a Dece, and knew how much weird shit there really was floating around, so she wasn't asking that lightly. "It should be, yeah." "Okay." Bobby didn't sound reassured, but that was mostly because I did a pretty shitty job of sounding reassuring. When I got to Route 1, I turned right instead of left, heading north through the Keys until I crossed the 7-mile bridge. Right after that was Marathon. I'd only driven through here before, so I was grateful that the phone bank was on the overseas highway itself, the route that went through all the Keys. I found 29th Street easily enough. At the corner was a storefront with a big "For Rent" sign over the door, but inside I saw a bunch of people sitting at card tables with phones on them. I saw the pale face and red hair of Ginny Blake, the Sigyn, talking on one of them. The building had its own parking lot, so I put Rocinante in one of the available spots and headed inside. I was approached by a perky little thing whose head barely cleared my forearms. "Hi! Oh my god, I totally hope you're here to volunteer because we've still got a few phones left and the bill goes before the state legislature tomorrow. So if..." I held up both hands and resisted the urge to smother her with them. "I'm sorry, I'm just here to see my friend. She's right over there." I pointed at Ginny. Perky thing's face fell. "Oh, well, okay, but she's on till 5. Frowning, I pulled my phone out of the strap of my bathing suit and checked the display, which read 4:56. "It's 5 now." "It is?" Her eyes widened, a lot, and she turned and ran off. "Oh my god, people, it's 5 o'clock, and we still gotta hit the panhandle. Let's go, people!" Since Perky Thing didn't seem interested in me anymore, I wandered over to the small desk where Ginny was sitting. "Thank you very much for your support, Mr. Mazurowski. Take care." She hung up and looked up at me. "Cassie, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you volunteered for Greenpeace." "I don't. I'm looking for you. Can we go somewhere to talk? Little Miss Oh my God over there said you're done now anyhow." Ginny smiled indulgently. "Do not be so hard on young Eleonora. She means well. May I trouble you for a lift back to Key West?" "Sure, to Mayor Fred's?" She smiled bitterly for that. "No, we can go to my home." I finally got to find out where she lived. Yay! We hopped into Rocinante and I decided not to bother sugarcoating it. Loki's back. Ginny closed her eyes, let out a very long breath, and said, "Of course he is. First that one-eyed jackanapes nearly got us all killed because of some idiotic promise he made centuries ago. Now he can't even hold on to my dear ex-husband." She shook her head. "Does the Allfather have a plan to stop him from whatever imbecility he has planned next?" I hesitated. "Loki cast a spell that keeps Odin off Key West itself. He thinks he's going to go after you tonight at Mayor Fred's." "After me? Does he really think that's going to work again?" Another hesitation as I turned left onto Route 1 to take us home. "Well, from what I understand, it's worked once or twice before." Ginny looked away, her pale skin flushing. "I've made mistakes in the past. You took him back after he left you in a cave." Closing her eyes, Ginny moaned and waved her hands up and down. I know. Look, I can't help it. I fell in love with him the minute I saw him in the forest. He just has this lovely mischievousness about him. An amazing strength and charisma." She looked away, staring at the spectacular view of the water from the 7-mile bridge. About halfway over the bridge, she turned back to me. "You have to understand, he does love me too, but he's an immortal and a born troublemaker. He tries to destroy the world. He fails. He decides he wants to settle down with me. We're happy for a while. He gets bored. He tries to destroy the world again, usually by asking me to help, at which point I leave him, and he goes off and forms a cult or a band or whatever his latest scheme is. It fails, and he comes back to me. And I swore that after Woodstock, I wouldn't do it again." "That was the last time he tried this?" I asked, politely refraining from pointing out that I hadn't been born yet during Woodstock, though my parents were there as little kids with their hippie parents. This was the upbringing that led to them naming their twin children Castor and Pollux. Ginny nodded and stared back out at the water again. Joe Cocker had just brought the house down with his cover of the Beatles with a little help from my friends. which was his closer. Country Joe and the Fish were setting up for their set. Loki moved effortlessly through the crowd, long blonde hair trailing behind him as he sought out his wife. He soon found Sigyn with a group of musicians, though calling them such was giving them far too much credit. Their lutes were poorly tuned, their singing horribly off-key. Sigyn was playing some manner of hand drum to accompany them, and she kept perfect time, so there was that at least. He just stood and watched them, trying not to wince and thoughtfully stroking his long red beard. After they finished a song, one of the singers looked up and said, "Hey man, want to cop a squat and rap with us? Got some good grass." "No, thank you. I wish to speak to my wife." Only then did Sigyn look up, her lovely face framed by waist-length straight red hair. "Hello, Sigyn." The singer laughed. "What's a Sigyn, man?" Sigyn. Loki shook his head and laughed mirthlessly. I'm sorry. The other one joined the laughter. "This is Gaia!" Loki shook his head and laughed mirthlessly. What a fitting pseudonym. Pseudo what? This cat is seriously making a bad scene, man. Sigyn finally got to her feet. "Don't worry, boys. I'll take care of him, then we can catch Country Joe." "Groovy." She grabbed Loki by the arm, and they wandered off to stand near a large tree. Several folks wandered by in various stages of undress, and Loki realized there was a swimming hole nearby. "What do you want?" she asked. "You. I've been a fool, and I want to go back to the way things were in London and in San Francisco before you decided to destroy the world again and again." Loki closed his eyes. "I let myself be carried away. There's been this children's literature that portrays a version of the Aesir. It's called a comic book," Sigyn said. "You're in it quite a bit, though they made you dark-haired and Thor a blonde." For the first time since Loki arrived at the song circle, Sigyn smiled. Loki's heart melted at the sight, just as it had centuries ago in the forest outside Aegir's Hall. "That gave me an uptick of power that I thought would be enough to bring about Ragnarok." "And you failed?" Loki sighed, and then lied through his teeth. "I didn't even try. I realized that if I did bring about the end of all that is, I would never see you again." He cupped her cheek with his hand and stared intently at her. She stared right back. "Damn it." "It was good for a while," Ginny said as we drove slowly through Stock Island in traffic that kept us at under 40 miles an hour, and often under 20. But whatever else she was going to say was interrupted by my suddenly hitting the brakes and bringing Rocinante to a screeching halt just as we were about to cross the bridge to Key West. Luckily, we were in traffic, so the SUV behind me didn't rear-end me. The thing was, the car in front of me was actually accelerating. "Why did you hit the brake?" I blinked. I have no fucking clue. But I can't make my foot go to the accelerator. Thinking fast, I hit the hazard lights. Thankfully, there was a shoulder on the bridge, so once I turned the wheel to the right, I was able to move the car to the side. As soon as I turned the wheel back left, I slammed on the brake again. "What the fuck?" Ginny, for her part, threw her head back and laughed. "Oh, this is perfect!" "You said Loki cast a spell to keep Odin off the island." I nodded. "That was probably too specific a spell for him to manage, given how weak he must be after you and the Allfather spanked him in April. Instead, he just cast a spell that kept all Aesir off the island." I stared at her for a second, and then joined in the laugh. I stopped laughing when I realized the problem. "Wait, so I can't go home either?" Holding up a finger, Ginny said, "Perhaps not. You're not actually of the Aesir, so it may not affect you. But I am in your vehicle. If I leave, you may be able to proceed. I can't just leave you here." But Ginny was already opening the door. "I will be fine. Go and tell my husband what a colossal blunder he has made." As soon as she hopped out of the car, I gingerly moved my right foot. Sure enough, I was able to move forward, so I killed the hazards, merged into the traffic, and headed straight for where I figured Loki was going to wind up eventually, Mayor Fred's. I was also incredibly cranky that I still wasn't going to find out where Ginny lived. After parking Rocinante at the Botroff house, I walked straight from there to the saloon on Green Street. I might have stopped at the room first, but I didn't want the captain to know what I was doing. He gets into these overprotective moods, and if he knew I was going to talk to Loki without Odin's protection, he'd have tried to talk me out of it. And I might have listened, so why even risk it? As Ginny had said, it was too early for 1812 to have started. Ihor, the bartender, was playing a classic rock mix over the PA. There were some folks playing pool, the usual combination of tourists and regulars both at the bar and at the tables. We were getting into early evening, so there were lots of people getting their last drink in before heading to the boardwalk for sunset. Sure enough, there was Loki, sipping a beer at the bar, sitting next to Larry, one of the regulars, who was bitching about the Yankees while sporting his Rays ball cap. It was actually good to see him bitching, as he'd been subdued ever since being reunited with the son he had with a water elemental. That mating made him immortal, so I wasn't surprised that he and Loki had hit it off. They had shit in common, you know? "Hey, Cass," Larry said. "This is Sigurd. He's here to see 1812. Says he knows Ginny from way back." I shook my head. "Yeah, I know. Hey, Sig, can I talk to you in private for a second?" Loki, though, just stared at me, trying the same intense gaze thing he used on me in April when he was fronting Jotunheim, and trying to charm everyone into worshipping him enough to let him break Yggdrasil. For that matter, it was probably the same one he used on Ginny at Woodstock. "I'm sorry, but my new friend Larry and I were having a delightful conversation about baseball." "It's about Ginny," I added. "Ah!" Loki's face fell. "Will you excuse me, please, Larry?" "Of course. Didn't realize you two knew each other. I need a smoke anyhow." Larry hopped off this bar stool and went outside to suck nicotine. Once Larry departed, Loki asked, "What about Sigyn?" "What, are you using another glamour again so folks don't recognize you as Gunnar Rickardsson, mediocre lead singer of Jotunheim?" One of the side effects of being a Deist was the glamours didn't affect me. "It seems prudent under the circumstances." He leaned forward. "Tell me, little Deist, what has happened to Sigyn?" "She's not going to be here tonight." "When will she be here?" I grinned. "Well, that's sort of kind of up to you. See, she spent this afternoon up at Marathon volunteering for Greenpeace." Loki shook his head. "How very like her." Then his face fell. "Wait, Marathon?" "Yeah, about an hour north of here. Which means the same spell that's keeping Odin from stepping on your head is..." Slamming a hand on the bar, Loki cried, "Damn it!" "So it's your choice," I said. "Drop the spell and Odin grabs you. Don't drop the spell and you don't get to make yet another pointless attempt to try to win your wife back." Loki grinned. "She caught poison in a bowl for me for 8 centuries, little Deece. What makes you think I can't convince her once more?" "Well, maybe you can. I'm sure she went to Woodstock swearing she'd never get together with you again, and then you showed up. She told me she was done with you when I saw her earlier, but 5 minutes with you may change that." "Then I shall leave the spell intact," Loki said. "What was it that your poet Shakespeare said? 'It is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all.'" That was Tennyson, actually. Loki frowned. "Are you sure? I have a master's in English literature, and you were stuck in a cave when Tennyson was alive, so yeah, I'm pretty sure. Look, you can't keep the spell up forever. Odin's probably going to get impatient and try to stop it. Or I will. Or Ginny will move on, which would piss me off, as she's become a good friend in the last 6 months. Plus, 1812 will need to find another drummer. And I also just had lunch with Odin, and he's tired. I doubt he'd be able to hold you for longer than another 6 months before you found your way out of wherever he put you." That got a smug grin out of Loki. "True. So drop the spell. I'll convince Odin to let you stay free as long as you don't do anything stupid. And if you hurt Ginny in any way, shape, or form, or if you decide to try the Ragnarok thing again, so help me, I will twist your fate something fierce." Loki flinched. "You don't even know how to do that, do you?" Those last 2 words were said with more uncertainty than I'd yet heard from him. I gave him a smug grin of my own. "I'll learn. Do we have a deal?" After taking a thoughtful sip of his beer, Loki turned to stare at me. He did have amazing eyes, and if I didn't want so much to rip his face off, I might have found him incredibly attractive. I certainly got the mischievousness and charisma and strength that Ginny was talking about. But mostly I wanted to rip his face off, which he must have figured out because he stopped staring at me and looked at his beer some more. "Very well," he finally said. "I will release the spell, and we shall see what happens." That night, 1812 played a killer show. Odin, Loki, and I were all in the audience, sitting around the table closest to the ficus around which Mayor Fred's was built, also the section of Yggdrasil that Loki had tried to shatter in April. Odin had agreed to at least let Loki watch the show and speak once to Sigyn before deciding whether or not to go along with my plan. Which, I gotta say, was reasonable, considering it was a plan I came up with while sitting in traffic on Route 1. They finished their first set with a John Robertson song off his last CD. Then Bobby announced that they were taking a break. Ginny came to the table and sat with the 3 of us. "Before you say anything, Loki, I want you to know that I have no interest in taking you back. I've made that mistake once too often, and besides, I have a life here. I like it on Key West, and I care about these people. Do you know how long it has been since I had friends? It was always the Earth Nymphs, or sycophants, or the Aesir, who only saw me as your wife. And then I was alone with you for 8 centuries. It took me until now to realize what was missing in my life. I started to find it at Woodstock before you went and derailed me. I have people. Mortals are actually very good company, and I prefer theirs to yours. I applauded. Odin smiled. Loki just stared. Finally, he said, in fact, Sigyn, I was not going to tell you I wanted you back. Really? Ginny sounded dubious, to say the least. No, not really, he said with a bland smile, but I knew that saying it would be pointless. And now I know it even more. If the Allfather is willing, I would like to stay and see this new life you have created. Perhaps, in your own time, you may allow me to become part of it. He grinned. Besides, I rather like this tavern. I rolled my eyes. He and Larry were talking baseball for hours before you guys set up. Oh, well, Ginny said dryly. If Larry likes you, there'll be no getting rid of you. Loki, however, was looking at his blood brother. Is this acceptable to you, Allfather? No. At Loki's crestfallen expression, he added, but I will accept it in any case. Cassie is correct that I have neither the capacity nor the desire to become your keeper once again. Snorting, Loki said, of course not. 800 years ago, you fobbed it off on Scaldi. Today you do the same to the little Dees. Hey! I barked. I've had enough of that. I'm half a foot taller than your sorry-ass bucko, and the name's Cassie. I've still got the scale from the Midgard Serpent from when I cast the counterspell on you, and if you call me Little Dees one more time, I'll shove that scale right up your ass. Loki held up both hands. I stand chastised. Damn right. A little bit later, 1812 got back up on stage to start their second set. Bobby went up to the mic and said, this first song is one our drummer, Ginny Blake, wants to dedicate to someone in the audience she's known for a long time. They broke out into With a Little Help from My Friends, Joe Cocker's arrangement from Woodstock. I shook my head, Loki grinned, and Odin let out a long breath. After the song ended, Loki leaned over to me. It seems you've already learned, Cassie. What do you mean? That's twice you succeeded in twisting my fate. I leaned back in the chair and gave Loki a thoughtful expression, and then I held up my pint. Then here's to twisting the night away. Yeah. That story and 8 others are available in Ragnarok and Roll, Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet. I'm pretty close to having enough stories for a second collection, which will be called Ragnarok in a Hard Place. More Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet. I have to actually write the title story for that, which is still being supported on Indiegogo. If you go to my website at DeCandido.net, there's a link there. I'm working on that story right now, which is why I'm doing this thing this week. I'm kind of in a Cassie mood. And once I finish that story, I should have enough stories to form a second collection. So, like I said, my website is DeCandido.net. Please check me out there. Check me out, my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. And please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. One of the tiers gives you vignettes featuring my original characters, and there are more than half a dozen Cassie Zukav vignettes up there, among others. Again, thank you very much, and please stay safe.